I'm Dr. Elizabeth Roselle, Interim Associate Dean and MBA Director for the College of Business Administration here at Missouri State University, and I'd like to welcome you to the 2011 Public Affairs Conference. I'd like to say just a little something about the mission of our university. As many of you know, we have a public affairs mission, and here at the university, we believe our mission calls for us to make our expertise, talent, and knowledge available to the community in order to enhance our community. And so the Public Affairs Conference is one way that we do that. Another example of this is currently we have a student group called Bears Bringing Hope. They are trying to collect $30,000 in 30 days to benefit those folks in Japan. So there'll be students after the presentation with baskets, and you're welcome to donate to that cause if you feel led to do that. I'd like to ask you during the presentation if you would please turn off your cell phone and other electronic devices. Please refrain from texting, emailing, tweeting, and all those other things during the speaker's presentation. I'd also like to thank the people at Accenture for helping make available to us tonight our guest speaker, Mr. Bill Perry, and I'll be introducing him in a moment. The format for tonight is that we'll have the presentation, and then afterwards there'll be a question and answer session, so you're welcome to make your inquiries at that time. There will be a microphone available to you. We'll have someone running around giving you the microphone if you have a question to ask, because we want everyone to hear your question. So now, my introduction to our speaker tonight. The title of his presentation is Everyday Leadership, in case you're not the president, a CEO, or a general. Mr. Bill Perry is our speaker for this evening. He's a senior executive at Accenture, a global management consulting, technology, and outsourcing firm. Mr. Perry has participated in more than $20 billion in outsourcing and technology services transactions, first for Electronic Data Systems Corporation and then for Accenture. With technical services industry experience in more than 20 countries, he co-leads the Negotiation Center of Excellence called the COE. The COE leads the negotiation and/or provides advice for Accenture's largest and most complex agreements. A much smaller but equally important responsibility for the COE is it provides negotiation and decision-making training for the company's executives and lead business negotiators. Mr. Perry earned a marketing degree from Missouri State University in 1984. He's one of our own. As a distinguished military graduate, Perry received a regular Army commission as a member of MSU's Military Science ROTC program. He's a military parachutist qualified. He served 4 years in active military, and he left in 1988 with the rank of captain. In March 2007, Mr. Perry returned to campus to speak with us during the Breakfast with Champions series, which is co-sponsored by the College of Business Administration. Please welcome Mr. Perry, and we're looking forward to what you have to say to us tonight.
That was all on you. That was you. Go away. I'm I'm wondering how I'm going to open up tonight because I had dinner a little while ago with some of the people that I've been spending the last couple of days with at your conference, and there was just a moment of reflection that I was just looking out of Tower Club, just looking out at Springfield, so just kind of give me a minute to gather my thoughts. I will tell you this, there will come a day in your life that you will be like me, fat, old, bald, and gray, and you're going to stand in front of an audience like this and realize that, oh my God, I can't believe I graduated from here. I spent most of my time here at Mexicanville or Brown Derby, and I'm not quite sure in which order. So it's good to see that those institutions of higher learning have survived here. So just out of curiosity, by show of hands, how many of you were told to be here to get credit? All right, look, this is just between us. You guys come down one at a time, $10 a piece, you're out of here. Give me an email address, I'll send you the notes and we're good. Any takers? Phil, look the other way. No takers? All right, I'm going to go through this stuff here. Listen, thank you all for coming out tonight. First off, I do want to thank Dr. Gloria Galanis for inviting me here. It is an honor. It is a privilege to be here. I'm glad I've made the time to come back. I also want to thank Libby. Where did she run off to? I've lost her here somewhere. Ah, there she is in the back. Libby several months ago innocently asked me to do this, to which I said yes, and having absolutely no idea what I was going to do and what I was going to say. I'm a professional negotiator, so just let me tell you, that was actually a bad move on my part. So I've agreed to something not knowing what the hell it is I'm going to do. I also want to express thanks for all of the panelists that I had an opportunity to spend some time with this week. This conference, when you read about it and you see the words unique, you always step back and go, unique. Well, isn't that a marketing cliche? But I have really, really enjoyed my time here. It's expanded my horizons. I stepped out of what I think is my normal business comfort zone to spend some time, and I'm going to try to mention my panelists by name. John Kaiser, Douglas, apologize, don't remember your last name, Dave Lennox, today Truman, Rob Shetterly, thank you, and Marilyn, I am so sorry. We had a very interesting day, but it was a great opportunity to spend time with people who I normally would not meet because we do different things. And so I hope that you guys get a chance to either see, I guess, the video and the audio that will come out with some of this, because it's really a unique opportunity for everybody here, okay? This is an institution of higher learning, but take advantage of seeing the differences in people have here. And the beauty of us having a discourse, whether we agree or disagree isn't the point, but it's a chance for you guys to see and hear multiple opinions and views. So for that, I think this is a very well put together conference. I also know that I'm competing for your time tonight. I understand that CSI has a new show on. Burn Notice is doing a rerun on USA. The Cooking Channel has an extended dialogue on boiling water tonight that I know you guys are missing out on, so I'm going to try to make sure that you guys' time is well spent here. I have a simple goal tonight. I'm an executive, so I can only retain about 2 facts at a time. So let me share this with you. I want to have a friendly, but I want to have a candid dialogue about leadership. That's what I'm here to talk to you about. And I'm going to call it everyday leadership, and I want to put it in the context of the theme, leading in a global society. And when you leave tonight, if I can ask you to think about 2 things, I want you to leave with 2 primary thoughts here. Number 1, a legitimate belief that many of you are probably leaders and don't recognize it. It's not a traditional form of recognition. We have a view of leaders that I think Gloria wrote, that it's almost a larger-than-life figure that I guess we assume will ascend from the heavens and bail us out. Well, life doesn't work that way. And I'm going to share some examples with you that'll probably get you to believe that there are a lot of things that you do that actually are a form of leadership. Whether you do it intentionally, unintentionally, but you are leading in some way or another. And the second thing I want you to understand is that regardless of what you do and how discreet you think you are, somebody is watching. I'm not talking about God is watching, it's not one of those types of things, but you are a role model. Whether you like it or not, good or bad, you're setting an example. And I want you to be a little bit mindful of that, because I think what happens is a lot of times we engage in actions or behaviors and we don't know that we're actually in a position to influence people that we love or that we're simply leading. Like family, students, co-workers, people in your charge if you're in a position of responsibility. But they might be deriving their core values, their core beliefs by watching you, watching your actions. And what I mean by actions, it could be as simple as how you make decisions, how you resolve conflict. Do you argue all the time? Scream and yell? How do you engage others? How do you solicit feedback? Are you open to other ideas? You're setting that as an example. And like I said, whether you like it or not, you're a role model. Now, what I'm not going to do and what I don't intend to do is get into a protracted dialogue about whether leaders are born, whether they're made or not. That's for somebody else to decide. But I do want to talk to you about things that might be a little bit more everyday. And I hope you can have an appreciation for this. I try to have a sense of humor. I try to laugh. Life is too short. And so I want you to step back a little bit and get comfortable, but I also want you to reflect on what I'm going to tell you tonight. And I'm probably going to share some things with you that are pretty personal, and probably you'll get emotional. And hopefully when we end tonight, we're going to have a chance for some questions. So if that's agreeable, I'm going to go through some content here, give you guys a chance to ask some questions. Everybody good with that? Too bad, that's what I'm going to do anyway. So. I want to start by dividing up the dialogue here a little bit tonight into 3 phases. And the first phase is really establishing a common ground for leadership. All right, so let's get on the same playing field. And then I'm going to share some personal reflections on the evolution that I've had on this topic. And then I'll close with some thoughts maybe that you can take away from here. A little bit of first full disclosure here. When I accepted the invitation about 7 months ago, I don't want to say that I was arrogant and that I was overconfident about it, but I said, sure, I can approach this subject. I feel pretty good about this. I have a global leadership role in my company. I've been around quite a bit. I feel like I've got a pretty good open mind. I've seen a lot. It's been 23 years ago since I left the Army as a captain, so I felt like I had some leadership experience in the military. And I felt really good about things. And something changed along the way. And honestly, it caused me to frankly rewrite all the remarks that I was prepared to share with you several months ago. And I think it's going to become a little bit more obvious to you as we go along as to why I did that. So I'm going to ask for your indulgence. The first thing is that I'm probably going to use some slide content to kind of get you from looking at me, because I realize I've got an extended forehead and the glare is probably going to, distract you guys a little bit here. So if I could have the gentleman turn on the slide for me. That was intentional. Okay, I just want you to know that. Yeah, how many of you guys ever see government documents where it says this page intentionally left blank? This slide intentionally left blank. Okay, and later on I'll give you guys a little bit of, I can tell you I got the letters to slant. I've got considerable PowerPoint skills, as you guys are going to see later on. Oh, come on, that was funny. This is going to be a long night if you guys can't laugh. I'm dropping an F-bomb in 10 minutes, so you guys got to get ready for this. Where's Libby at? We've got to bet on this. Let me try to provide you a little bit of context. You're probably standing up here and Libby introduced me and said, well, this is Bill and this is what he does, and she called me Mr. Perry, which makes me nervous. The only guys who do that are typically people who don't know me or somebody from the government. So my name is Bill, and if you're going to ask questions later on, please call me Bill. I want to give you some perspective about who I am so you have context in the remarks that I'm going to give you. We can always agree to disagree, but at least I want you to know who I am. I'm the son of a now deceased career Army soldier who fought in Korea and in Vietnam. And I don't know how to use this. He met my mother in the 50s and 60s while he was serving in Germany. I ended up living there for almost 14 years when my father served there. I spent most of my early years much closer to my German family than my American half. When my father retired from the military in 1979, it was ironically a transitional moment. Dad leaves the service and my mother's career takes off. My mother ended up retiring from a company as an executive which bore its founder's name, Estee Lauder. So Dad's career ended and my mother's career took off. And she spent quite a bit of time there. She hates this picture, by the way, so in case any of you guys meet her, don't tell her that I showed you this picture. But I eventually ended up here in Springfield. I graduated in 1984, as Libby pointed out, but not only with a degree, but I finished also with what was called a regular Army commission. I became an officer, a second lieutenant, and on graduation day, I had hair. I need to stop. All right, I'm done. Let me tell you something, guys. You start losing this, you're going to be saving all these pictures, okay? But when I graduated here, I left with a commission. What I didn't understand at the time is I was actually part of a long tradition here. And for some of you who don't know that, the military science program has commissioned almost 1,800 men and women since the 1950s. I think it was 1956. They have served our country honorably and well wherever we've asked them to go. This university has produced 11 general officers. The most recent general officer, her name is Karen Dyson. She's a family friend. And she was the first female general officer this university has produced. I want to kind of go on this program here for a minute because while it's a small program, I want you to understand the impact that it has here. Currently, there are 94 contracted students here. They have signed a formal agreement to obligate themselves to the active duty, to the reserve, to the National Guard when they leave here. And in fact, the total value of their education of these 94 students, the United States Army is financing to the tune of almost $1 million a year. I want to put that in context for you. In order to have an endowment to fund $1 million a year would take almost $22 to $25 million. So whether you know it or not, that's what you have sitting here on this campus, and I'd like to refer to that as leadership in a very different way, but I think it's very unique to this campus. And so you have a program here that has quite a bit of history and heritage. Now, for me on a personal level, as my civilian career took off, I spent 23 years engaged in some form or fashion in the sale, negotiation, delivery of outsourcing or technology services. I've had the privilege and benefit to work in 20 countries. I think it's 23 or 24. Honestly, don't remember, and I don't want to be rude, but I really don't care anymore. I've got 7 million miles with American Airlines. You know, somebody told me one time, did you see the George Clooney movie? And I said, no, I've lived it. I did see it flying back from Buenos Aires a few weeks ago, and I said, wow, I shouldn't have said that because I'm actually not having an affair. I'm not as anal as he is about the card thing, but I've pretty much lived that life. And so after being away from home that long, it really doesn't matter. The last 9 months, I spent approximately 120 days living and working in Brazil. So that's been a very different, unique experience. Again, the enlarged forehead and the tan should have given some of that away. Come on, guys, this is going to be long. I did 2 shots at dinner tonight, and I'm in better spirits than you guys are. On a professional level, I have 2 jobs. I have a leadership responsibility. I'm responsible for a dozen negotiators who operate on 6 continents. On a personal level, I'm an individual performer, if you will. I'm also a professional negotiator. So if I were to describe for you in the simplest way possible what I do and what our people do and what my team does is that we, in effect, enable effective decision making. That's what we do, okay? Negotiating is about making an informed decision. It's not about winning and losing. It's about understanding somebody else's perspective and making a decision. And so when a lot of people hear about what you do as a negotiator, they try to hide your wallet, I'm going, look, I just want to make an informed decision. The more questions I ask, the better I understand. So hopefully if you guys consider a career choice like this, I just want you to understand because I think it's a key to your success while you're here on this campus. Take this opportunity while you're here to learn as much as you can, learn about the differences that you have amongst each other, and you will be a better person, a better leader for that. I just happen to have a job that pays me to do this, but when I step back, that's what they're paying me to do, to understand and help people make decisions. So let me start with number 1. Still got hair. Let me start with number 1 here. It's a common basis for understanding. Let me just ask you by a show of hands, how many of you here are parents? Grandparents? Caregivers? Volunteer? Get liquored up at Brown Derby? All right, that was a bigger distribution of hands. The reason why I'm asking this, in terms of responsibilities of a parent, a grandparent, a caregiver, a volunteer, well, those are forms and actions that define leaders. Now, sometimes parenting becomes somewhat of an accident, that you're surprised you're going to become a parent, but the point is that the time and the moment picked you, and you have to act. You've either decided to do something, and as I said, the circumstance picked you, but you responded. And that's why I always look at this. I've been a father for 10 years, and I didn't pick the moment. We were surprised by the event, but here I am. I'm a dad now. I was sharing with somebody earlier when we drove our daughter home from the hospital. I'm driving the car. My wife's in the back seat with our daughter, and I stopped and I said, "You do realize we have absolutely no friggin' idea what we're doing?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "I suppose we need to keep driving home now." And then you know what we did to make ourselves feel better? We rationalized and thought about all of the other idiots that we know out there who have managed to have kids and raise them. We said, well, if they can do it, I'm sure we can. And then we went home and had a couple of shots and raised our daughter. So, I mean, that's kind of how we're working things out. But you know, the reason why I ask you about what you do in terms of were you volunteering or a parent, because sometimes we don't actually understand the responsibilities that we actually have. We kind of take it for granted. That's why I didn't say how many of you are managers, executives, police chiefs. I didn't go down that particular path. Sometimes those titles are somewhat self-evident, but I think as we all come to realize, just because you have a title doesn't mean you're actually proficient in that job. I'm just being candid and being honest about it. But I think many of us who are parents, I think we feel a certain sense and an obligation and responsibility, and that's why I brought that up, and I try to do my best every day. So let me try to offer you guys a definition for leadership. This is Bill Perry's view of it. You notice I've mixed in different colors now? Man, this is going to be a long night, guys. This is my definition of leadership. Defining priorities or interests from which you create a sustainable plan, developing and inspiring others to accomplish the same and carry it forward. It's not a secret that I put some of these letters in red in here. Defining priorities, what matters. Sustainable. There are lots of plans out there, but they don't last. Inspiring others. Getting people to follow you, contribute, give you ideas, give you different perspective. And then there's a generational obligation. I'm going to be 50 this summer, so when you get old, you start thinking about these things. How do you make it sustainable and carry it forward? And so that's why I came up with this definition. When I think back about my parents and when I was growing up, they had a simple plan. And it probably sounds familiar to most of you, but their plan was basically do better than their parents. That's all it was. And what it meant to me as a son was we just want to give you opportunities we didn't have. We don't know how we're going to do it, but you're going to go to college, whatever that meant. You're going to finish high school, you're going to go to college, and hopefully you'll do better than us. The plan had its ups and downs. Didn't always work out. The market or the economy didn't always cooperate. But they did their best to follow it. And the point that I'm trying to make here is there's a little bit of sense of personal responsibility in planning. And I think what was interesting is that the basic leadership principle my parents instilled in me was to be prepared and don't assume somebody else is going to bail you out. Now, as a teenager, it sounded awfully harsh, but I think I've been better served the past 30 years for at least understanding what they were trying to do. And then I started to ask, where did they get their philosophy from? Where did they think about things like that? Are they just being a pain in the ass, or are they trying to actually make a point with me? My father was born in West Texas during the Depression. They didn't have a lot. His father was a Freemason. Traveled around the country. He was building nuclear power plants in the 30s and 40s. Sent the money home. Came home every 6 months. My mother, she was born in Germany during World War II. Actually, a month after her father was killed. She was raised by her mother. These people didn't have a lot. So to them, the whole concept was just build upon the previous generation. And so now that I step out here in front of you and, now that I'm grown up, or at least I think I am, honestly, I look around and ask myself, is such a basic lesson of self-reliance being taught anymore? I'm okay to ask for help, but do we teach ourselves that we should look to ourselves first to try to do the best that we can? And I think in that sense of self-reliance, it also becomes more easy for you to give back. Because one of the greatest joys I have is to be here, to be with you, to try to offer you a perspective. That's my way of giving back. But I was here because of what my parents taught me. This leader role that I've tried to define for you, at least that I'm offering, it says that for some of you who are doing some things such as parenting, or you're taking care of others, or you're volunteering, you're responsible for some pretty serious outcomes. Sometimes you're not aware of that. I think about my wife, and every now and then we step back and think we're raising our daughter, and I look at her and I get the shakes. She goes to bed at night looking at Daddy and going, he's my role model, and I'm thinking, man, you've got issues. But I'm doing my best. It's the best that I can do. And as much as it hurts me, I'm glad to be here, but I miss my family. But it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make, and it's a sacrifice my wife supports. My daughter doesn't always understand, but my wife supports. And I know in today's world and society, we focus a lot on material things. We're hoping that you become successful here, and I guess maybe sometimes we try to define success for you as material things. I understand that. And sometimes it just means wealth creation, money and all the rest. We count it, we desire it, try to grow it, and on it goes. But I'm just trying to get you to think a little bit about some of the things that you do every day, and that you're actually doing some good things out there. And when the moment hits you and that you're asked to step up and asked to contribute, that when in fact you do take action, even if it's in the smallest ways, to help somebody out, to help a neighbor or a friend, you're being a leader. You're demonstrating a form of leadership. And I think it's much better than refusing to help. And I hope that what I try to instill in you tonight is to take that opportunity, even if you just spend a little bit of time. I wish I could remember the name of the company, but there's an insurance company that had a commercial that actually never advertised their product, but they spent a lot of time showing one person doing a good deed, which was followed by another person doing a good deed and another person doing a good deed. And I thought it was one of the best commercials out there. It basically says that being nice and being kind can be contagious. So I have to think about that. I think I refer to that as random acts of kindness. You get a lot further in life by being nice as opposed to being a rude prick. That's not going to get bleeped, is it? All right. Well, that's not bad. A half hour into it and I dropped one. I'm not trying to be harsh with you here, but I'm not trying to ignore the real life problems that have fallen people here today in our economy. But I just want you to think that the spirit of this conference here has shaped my thinking a little bit more than what I thought in the past. And what it made me think about is maybe one of the first steps in leadership is to build a consensus on a common objective. And that's why I thought the spirit of the conference followed that common objective about understanding where we're at in a global society and who we are and what we're doing, and welcoming differing opinions and thoughts. Because the other side of it is that if we're going to hope that somebody's going to come here and bail us out, we're going to wait a long time before David Petraeus or some other leader shows up in Springfield and decides to solve our problems for us. And so what I ask you to think about is that maybe one of the first things you do is that you develop a consensus, people like-minded looking to solve a problem. Be passionate about it. And be patient. A leader will emerge. You don't have to start with a leader. Maybe we start with a theme and a concept. There was a gentleman today, and I apologize, I can't remember his name right now, but he spoke about some work that he was doing in Ecuador, and he kind of made an interesting admission. He says, you know what, I'm a builder, but I'm not a sustainer. But it's interesting, we need creative people to help build things, and we need other people to know how to operate that. So those are different forms of leadership. But I just want you to think about, let's not get too impatient. Let's focus on an idea, and the leader will eventually emerge. But one of the other things that I've noticed is, and I think it was in the theme of that gentleman today, I just remember he was a guy wearing a jacket, said it was awfully cold here. But there are a lot of leaders out there who are supporting leaders. They're a supporting cast, if you will. And I think it's interesting, somebody who supports needs to have the courage of their convictions to whisper in somebody's ear and say, hey, I've got a different view, I've got a different opinion. As a leader, I've never approached my job and said, listen, I'm the boss, this is what we're going to do. I solicit feedback. I want to get everybody's views and opinions. Ultimately, I'm responsible for a decision, but at least I want to benefit of their interaction. And I think those who influence behind the scenes are effective leaders. I'm reminded of a statement years ago that was said. I haven't heard it in a long time. It's actually, I guess today it's considered to be sexist, but right now I'm not really worried about political correctness. But there was a statement that said, behind every successful man is a strong woman. Damn it. Actually, the point was about a supporting cast. I would not be here today without my wife. My father would not be here without my mother, and equally, my mother's success would have not been possible without Dad's support. It works both ways. So I ask you to think about leadership in a supporting role. Don't always have to be out front in the camera. That's why I look at political leaders sometimes, and I think sometimes our political leaders aren't defined by what they do, but those people who advise them and give them perspective. I mean, imagine being a president. You're responsible for everything, known or unknown, seen or unseen. Okay? Well, we can't expect a leader to know everything. So we expect them to make informed decisions, and that's what their advisors are there for. We can disagree with them later. History's got plenty of time to tell us whether they were right or wrong. But I want you to consider leadership by being a good counselor. And so think about that as a context. As I say that, I also believe that leadership requires judgment. We live in a world today where technology advances are very, very rapid, and data is created at such a speed. And I say data, not information. You derive information from data. But this data, all of these moving parts move at such a rate that I sometimes wonder that we are rushed to a judgment. I got to make a decision very fast. And sometimes we make bad decisions, and I step back and I say, well, wait a minute, where's the process where we're gathering data? I mean, how did life work before fax and FedEx and email? For Christ's sakes, how did we survive without our iPads? Well, we did. All right? So the idea behind it is to take advantage of what it provides you, but let it inform your judgment. I understand the speed and information. I'm in the business that sells speed and information, but it's like giving our clients a tool. We said, now that you've got this tool, the purpose of this tool is to provide you perspective from which you can make a judgment. So I always ask you to think about, as a leadership perspective, absorb the data, look at it, digest it, think about it. Don't be so quick to make a judgment. Get different perspectives. You've got plenty of time to decide. And think about that for a minute. I kind of call it leadership with speed because for those of us who are watching television on a regular basis right now, and you watch the events that are happening out there in the Middle East, Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, who knows what's going to happen in Syria? Just think about what's going on out there. I definitely understand why they're arguing for change. You hear them? They want to throw the guys out. I get it. I do understand. But if the first step is change, what happens next? I mean, then what? And the speed with which these events are transpiring, I mean, it was a couple of protests, and the next thing you know, Mubarak's on an extended vacation. Okay? But it's not actually over. If you understand what's going on in Egypt, he is gone, the military is still in control. And they'll eventually move the pieces around. But if you just step back for a minute, imagine for a minute being an Egyptian citizen. Just think about what's going on here. You go from limited freedoms, which is a generous way of describing things there, to a more liberal form of expression, almost bordering on free speech, if you will, to the right to peacefully assemble, to protests. And like I said, it's just gotten started, and it will take time, because if you notice, there is no leader who's filling that vacuum. So congratulations, you've removed the president, now what? And I always kind of joke about it because as a professional negotiator, I said, listen, I want to see the sequence. I want to see the steps. So that individual's gone. Who's next? Who's going to fill the vacuum? And I kind of argue that it's that governing part that makes it a little bit difficult. So I ask you to think about this on a local level and how it relates to what you are doing here. It's easy to demand change. Trust me, youth and vitality and vigor, everybody wants things to change. I get all of that stuff. Well, there's a saying that we have in business, be careful what you wish for because you might actually get it. And now you're responsible. And now you're in charge. And then you get to sit there and have people tell you how screwed up you are. Be a little bit careful about that. Think through what you're going to go through. and look how you inform your judgments. I was thinking back, and having lived in Germany for a long time, if you look back to, I guess by show of hands, another embarrassing, how many people were here in 1989? Look. I'm sorry. How many people were born before 1989? Okay, that was a better question. Do you guys remember what happened in 1989 in Germany? A bunch of East German tourists took a vacation into Hungary and then quickly went to the West German embassy, scaled the wall and said, "We quit, we want to join you guys." How quickly the Berlin Wall fell. Does anybody remember that? Does anybody know that it was the West German government's policy to reunify with the East, even though it was never possible? It was the stated policy of that government that we were going to reunite, and all of a sudden when it happened, they're going like, "We're not prepared." It's been 22 years since the wall has come down, or it'll be 22 years this fall. And if you talk to a lot of Germans, they're thinking the reunification actually isn't quite done yet. They got the change that they wanted, they planned for it, and they never pulled it off. I bring that up because I've done a lot of traveling, and I think about Korea. Imagine the potential that the Korean Peninsula may reunify. How's that going to work out? I'm not saying I'm against it, but just think about that for a minute. It may happen in our lifetimes. And my point here wasn't to drift off with all these different examples, but I just wanted you to think about the world that's around you and the things that are unfolding that you see overseas and the things that are unfolding here in America. And I wanted to help you inform your local experience. I want you to think about it that way, because if we agree that we're all leaders in one way or another, I want you to think about something else too. I want you to think about, if you're going to be a leader in your own life first. I always talk about leadership in terms of I'm going to lead others, I'm going to influence others. Start with yourself. And I bring that up because I think if once you start with yourself and decide to take control of your own life, I think you might be better qualified to then help and influence others. Get a stable footing, if you will. And then you'll get that opportunity to be a community leader, to be an activist, to help, to inspire others. But get comfortable with who you are. I joke a little bit. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that I'm the sole leader in my family. I've long ago figured that Accenture pays me twice a month, but I work for a 10-year-old girl named Sophie. And she points that out to me on a regular basis. And she says a lot of frightening things too. When I travel a lot, my wife called me up one time and she said, "My God, our daughter, she sounds like an adult." And I said, "What's she saying?" She would mention something and I said, "Let's just keep in mind it's the informed judgment of a 10-year-old, okay? She's got the words down, but she doesn't have the judgment." But then one day she surprised me. I was sitting out on a patio, smoking Cuban contraband and drinking a glass of wine. And my daughter came out and looked at me and she said, "Daddy, I want you to know that no matter what happens, I will always love you." I will always be your little girl. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking at her and I'm going like, I don't know what the feminine version of Damien is, Damiel or something like that, and I'm just kind of looking at her. So I turn around, I'm looking for my wife. She's alive. It's good. I'm looking for the two cats who have never actually forgiven us by having a child. They've just never accepted my daughter. It's like, because our daughter when she was 5 ate their food and that was like completely off the charts. So I'm looking around and I'm looking at her and I'm going, "What did you say?" She said, "I just want you to know that I'm always going to be your little girl." And women get very emotional about this. Now this is intended for the men. That was a warning. Okay? I'm bright enough to know she's sending me a message. And in about 10 years, there's going to be a kid who knocks on my door. Half of his head's going to be shaven. The other half's going to be something in highlights. There are going to be body piercings. And I'm going to have to kill him. But she did give me a heads up on this. Let me think about, I want to offer something else here too, and I talk about personal responsibility here. I'm an American, in case anybody was wondering. And I also recognize that I'm extremely fortunate to live in a country, in a society where free speech, the right to peacefully assemble, is afforded and it's protected. But I also believe in something called responsible speech. And my point here is just because you can say it, is it really instructive? And is it really constructive? Instruct and construct. You know, we've all heard that metaphor. It says, you know, once you let the toothpaste out of the tube, you can't put it back in. We've all heard that before. And so once something is said, whether it's regrettable or otherwise, it's out there. And I think we've all seen it, these public figures who eventually say something, stupid or otherwise, and then they're in front of a camera. I'd like to apologize to all the people out there I may have offended with my unfortunate remarks. And you know, you watch this, and I used to feel for these people. I really did. I'd step back and I said, wow, I'm really empathetic to it. What were they thinking? And then I realized that was the operative word, thinking. And so I ask you to think about it. Help make progress. Think about what you're going to say, why you're going to say it. And I'll get into a different discussion here, but as a professional negotiator, I look for traits and behaviors. I don't agree with half of the things that people say to me. It's not that I'm a disagreeable person, but if I'm negotiating an agreement or if I'm negotiating something, I'm trying to understand the other person's perspective. And I'd like to think that as an evolved society, we can raise above all of that and we can speak to each other and not get angry and not get upset and provide an opinion. So that's why I ask you to think about it. Free speech is granted and afforded to you in this country. Just think about it. The next time you blurt something out, next time you tweet something, send an email. I get a little bit of guidance within our company. I tell people, I said, you know what, stop emailing. Go see them. Go talk to them. You're really hacked off, you're really pissed at somebody, it's easy to sit there and go, all right, do this, eat something and die, fill in the blank, okay? Now go stand in front of them and say that. It's a little bit more difficult, isn't it? Tempers your remarks a little bit. And by the way, what's the point? So I ask you just to think about that every now and then. I love technology, but don't hide behind it. Does that make sense? You know, there are a lot of examples that we see today where people have been hurt or otherwise because of what people have written about them, tweeting and emailing and all these types of things. So I just ask you to think about what I believe and what I'm trying to ask you to think about is responsible speech. I will tell you this, as a professional negotiator, I've conditioned myself as best I can to not lose my temper and lose my control because I don't think it's very constructive. Because I think if you lose your temper, you in fact lose control. Not that I'm a control freak, but I don't want to lose control. I want to be able to listen and be coherent in the dialogue. So I resist the temptation for an outburst. I will tell you this, I got a sense of humor, I'm an unbelievable smartass, and half of the time I got to tell myself, don't say it, don't say it, you know. Interesting viewpoint. What you confuse as a brain, I think is a burned out light bulb, but let's make progress now. All right, so I hesitate to say those things, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get past the point because my real goal is to resolve problems. And you'll notice, you've heard that adage, you can get more with honey than you can with something otherwise. All I'm trying to do is get somebody to hear my point of view and to resolve our differences fairly. Give me a fair opportunity. And I think that's a form of leadership to be constructive in your dialogue. And you can do it without hatred and profanity, and I know I'm having a little bit of fun here with the language, but you can get a lot more done versus yelling at somebody. And as a professional traveler, what I love the most is being at the airport when somebody misses their flight and they lose their mind. I mean, it's great. And if you got a drink in your hand, it's even better. But you're sitting there and you're watching somebody yell and says, I want to get on this flight, I want to get on this flight. This happened at JFK years ago. We were going to London, something happened, I don't know, plane wasn't there. So we're all sitting there and we're going, look, plane ain't here. Last time I checked, you need to be on the plane to leave, and so since the plane's not here, we got to wait. This guy's screaming and yelling, and we can all hear it, and this woman is being very patient with him. And at some point, she says the most remarkable thing. She said, sir, there are two people involved in this discussion, and one of us is rapidly losing interest. And it didn't dawn on him what she was really saying. She was being very polite in a very subtle way. And what she said to him right after that said, sir, you see the big window out there? You have no idea how much I want to put your ass in that plane, and you will be the first that I call when it gets here. Now shut up and sit down. And everybody broke out in an applause. The woman can't produce a plane. It's not here for a reason, okay? But you see this type of activity and you ask yourself, what's the point? What's the purpose? It's not constructive. And by the way, somebody was watching. All of us were. And we were sitting there going, we're not leaving without the plane, dude, and she ain't producing it, so shut up and sit down. And I've always wondered in what country that guy's luggage ended up in. Because if she gets back and says, all right, jackass in 26A, well, all right, we'll put him next. Those two guys haven't bathed. We're going to put him next to him. That'll be a nice 8-hour flight. What's the city code for Bangladesh or something like that? Things don't happen by accident, so he's standing in London for a long time waiting for that bag that is never coming up. But what I'm trying to do here is to give you a couple of different points of views on how you're going to make decisions, because what I'm trying to do is actually, I don't want to be disagreeable. I want to understand the other person's point of view. And from that, if I understand the lens or the prism that you see things, maybe I can present an argument back to you, a constructive argument that says, I understand how you look at this. Maybe I can persuade you with an argument through the same lens that you would make a decision. I'm just trying to find common ground. But in order to do that, I have to listen. I have to hear their point of view. It's not about agreeing, I just need to understand. Because the other option is to lose control, or in my business, is to lose an opportunity to grow our company, which provides jobs and careers for our people. So I've got an awesome responsibility. It's not my job to sit here and go, well, I feel better, I was principled. Yeah, we didn't get the deal. I didn't get the deal because I didn't listen. We do something in our business, we call it win-loss reviews, and in those win-loss reviews, we try to go through the reasons why we are successful or not successful. And the number one reason why we don't win a deal isn't because of price or service. They tell us, we don't think you understood. You didn't listen. Something that basic. You didn't listen, you understand. The other company came in and said, we get it. It's that basic. So I hate to disappoint you. You're going to spend 4 years here. I'm going to give you the key to success. Shut up and listen. All right? And you'll be amazed what you're going to hear. And they're going to tell you what they're looking for. And it's your choice and obligation to figure out whether you can match a service or a product or an offering that's going to meet that. So, I also want to raise a different issue with you here. And I think we have a lot more leaders amongst our midst than we know. And I just got through giving you a rather extended version of I want you to listen, but I also want you to pay attention and look and watch. There are a lot of exceptional signs of kindness out there. People are acting in an unselfish way. How many times do we ever pay attention to that? Random acts of kindness, I called it. I want you to keep this in mind because I'm going to come back to this a little bit later. The concept that there are leaders amongst us, and they're not focused on claiming credit. They just act. And so as I close on the first end of this topic tonight, I wanted to persuade you a little bit of my view and my concept as a topic of leader, that many of us are exhibiting those traits today and we just don't know it. We don't need a job, or we don't need a badge, or we don't need a flag or a uniform. We just need to act, and act responsibly. So as I move forward, I'm going to hopefully give you a couple other examples. What I wanted to do now is I wanted to shift into a little bit more of a personal discussion, which is something about my personal evolution in leadership. And it's really a story about how I came full circle in understanding maybe who I was, albeit at 48 or 49 when this happened, and how certain things developed and influenced me over the years that I really didn't understand, and that a lot of this happened at home, and I was very much influenced by my father. Now, I'm going to focus a lot of my comments on my dad here for the next few minutes, and before I move on, I want to give a comment to the ladies out here. I'm not at all dismissing the leadership impact my mother had on me, but I think it's going to become a little bit more evident to you why I'm doing this. Growing up, I think like most of us, my father was a figure larger than life. I think most things are when you're a kid. And I'm going to cover some things here that are probably foreign and different to you as I speak about certain things related to the military. So I ask your forgiveness here. I think it's a historical context and it's part of American history. But as I talk about my dad, there are some things that I remember not so fondly, but some things that he said to me. And some of us have probably heard this before. There are a lot of things that happened that I didn't understand, and Dad used to look at me and say, son, trust me, this all makes sense when you're older. I used to hate that. And damn if that old bastard wasn't right. But it took his death for me to figure that out. And so you always ask yourself, you notice as you get older how much more intelligent your parents become. Is that really the case? Or who's becoming more intelligent, you or your parents? And so for those of you who probably have an interesting relationship with your mother or your father, I ask you to think about it, because trust me when I tell you, it will make sense to you when you're older. You're going to have to trust me on that. But the discussion here is about Dad, the man that admittedly I knew actually very briefly. And it was truly the last 9 years that I lived at home after my father came home from Vietnam in 1970. I left home after high school graduation, went to college, and honestly never saw my parents again except for holidays, phone calls. And it wasn't until in 2006, almost 26 years after I finished high school, that my parents moved to the Dallas area, that I got a chance to see them again. But like I said, the conversation is going to be about my dad, a leader who I thought I knew, and that's the operative word here, thought. And thought I knew him very well. Now at the outset, I said something that changed my mind after I got the invitation from Gloria. And it happened in December. We were exchanging some emails about logistics, topics, and timing. And then she sent me the email that said, you're going to be here tonight on the 14th of April. Today marks the 2nd anniversary of my father's death. You didn't know that. None of us did. It was fate. And so I feel obligated, as my father's son, to recognize his impact on my life, but the impact that he had on others. And I've read my remarks God knows how many times, and I thought I was going to be able to get to this. So bear with me for a minute. And the thing that I recognized after he passed, there were so many things that I saw and witnessed 10, 20, and 30, 40 years ago that I never really knew. And it was after my father died 2 years ago that my mother and I began to discover things about my father that we didn't know. She was married to him for 48 years, and we were discovering things after his death that we just never understood. This is the guy that I grew up with. Mr. Humor and personality here. But that's how I typically remember him. He was an authoritarian. And I ask you to imagine what that look did to me, but imagine what it did to the soldiers. I can barely remember in 1966 when he left for Vietnam. You notice in these pictures, the common trait is a cigarette. It was kind of the deal back then. That's my Uncle Ed, my grandmother. And that's when he went off and started what was referred to as Tour 365, a year in Vietnam. My mother and I, we moved back to Germany. We lived with her grandparents, or my grandparents. We lived on a farm. But I mean, these are the things that we knew about Dad. We knew what he had done, or at least we genuinely knew where he had went. But there were things that happened afterwards. And I think if you've ever lost a family member or a close person or a loved one, we typically go through personal effects. You look at pictures, photo albums, memorabilia. Well, there was a desk that we had at home, and in desk drawer there was a folder, and it was called letters. So I pulled it out, and I started looking at some of these things. And it was interesting. My mother and I were not horrified, but we were in shock. What we were reading Because first off, we never rummaged through Dad's desk. That was Dad's desk. He was hospitalized for 2 years before he passed, but we never went through Dad's stuff. And as we went through that, the first letter that I pulled out is this one here. And I'm going to share a couple pieces out of this because there's somebody writing my father that we never knew wrote this letter. We'd met him many times. He probably assumed we knew about this. And so at age 47, I'm discovering for the first time who my father was. He starts off by calling Dad Top. It was a term of endearment used for the senior enlisted soldier in a company. So he wrote the letter Top Perry. It was a little bit of an introduction here, and I'll keep some of the names out. A little bit graphic. I hope you remember me. I was in 2nd Platoon, Bravo, 2nd Battalion, 18th Infantry from June 66 to June 67. I also had a second tour with the company in 68 and 69. I was the big dark-haired guy from Louisiana that was shot in the leg in the firefight in the rubber trees outside of Bearcat on 9 September 66. And one of the men wounded with Lieutenant so-and-so by booby traps outside of Dion on the 26th of December when we were going to help C Company. I was also the soldier who killed the VC paymaster on 7 January 1967 during Operation Cedar Falls. An interesting opening. He's sharing with Dad, hopefully some things that Dad remembers. But it was the second page that struck us. I was in the area. I was in the area when you won your Silver Stars. Summer of 66, February of 67. I always admired you and felt you were what all first sergeants ought to be, and so few were. You have been my lifetime role model. And for me, you were what I always felt the soldier and a man ought to be. I'll be 50 years old in February. My oldest grandchild is 8. I have had untold numbers of occasions over the years in stressful situations where I found myself asking, what would Top Perry do? So I just wanted to let you know what a positive impression you made on a 19-year-old boy 30 years ago. You have walked with me over the years. And he signed it, duty first. I don't expect you to know what that means, but that was the motto of the 1st Infantry Division. My mother and I, we didn't know how to handle this. And I said something to you earlier about somebody was watching. Well, it was this 19-year-old boy from Louisiana was watching my dad. And after reading that letter, I started to read the other letters, and I could see a pattern in the correspondence. Men were reaching out to each other 30 years after an event. It was unimaginable to us. They were sharing emotional experiences. And honestly, I'm ashamed to say this, but after I read the letter, I was a little bit angry. And I was jealous. And then in another way, I said, I might actually have a brother here. He experienced a year with my father that I never had. But he seems to think he was better off for it. And it seemed to shape him as a man and as a soldier. He later on became a career law enforcement officer. But it was at this point that my mother and I felt like we were just actually starting to learn who a guy who I called Dad and she called husband, we were just getting to know who this guy was. So I started to engage these veterans. I started to ask them to tell me stories. Tell me something about my father. I mean, you guys were there. What was going on? And what's interesting here is I said, tell me the good and bad, and you get some of that too. And a common description by the younger soldiers was, well, Bill, your dad was an SOB. He really was. He was damn hard on us kids. And we were amazed how this old man, Dad was 33 at the time, they were 19, so I guess it's all relative, how this old man was humping through the jungle with all that gear and ammo chasing Charlie and chasing us kids and getting on our ass along the way. They also said things like, I was lucky to have him as my first sergeant. He taught this young captain the way of the jungle. And I think probably the finest phrase was, Top Perry was hard, but he was fair, and he kept us kids alive. So I started to reach out for others, and I ran across some of his peers. This was a picture that was sent to us last year. My mother and I never knew it existed. Again, the cigarette. I was going to have one of those. But we discovered later on this was taken on the 12th of November 1966. It was the day that Dad was promoted to first sergeant in Vietnam. These are my dad's band of brothers. I began to figure out who these guys were. The names don't mean anything to you, but just bear with me. That's Arlie Moore on the left from Delta Company. The guy next to Arlie was Dad's best friend in Vietnam. His name was Burl Sailor. His nickname was Hoss. If you remember the TV series Bonanza, they apparently think he looked like Hoss Cartwright. There was Dad. Wiley Tucker, the first sergeant from Charlie Company and the battalion sergeant major. And the guy next to him, I never got his first name, but his last name was Walden. He was a battalion operations sergeant. But these are men who spent a year with my father that I've never met before, and I wanted to understand what they saw. What did they learn? This is also the first and only picture that we have of my father with a smile on his face from Vietnam. I know that sounds a little awkward, but every other photograph of him was very serious. So at some point, at least, there was a moment of levity there. Probably with a bad-tasting warm beer from the Philippines. But I started to do some research, and I was reaching out, and I wanted to look at what was written about my father's units. I wanted to learn now, and so there was this thirst. I felt like an investigative reporter. So I started to find declassified military documents. I wanted to know what was going on. What I got from these men was their view of the world on the ground. I wanted to read what the Army was writing about the whole situation. It's not that I wanted to know about war. I wanted to know what my father went through. He spent a year there, and damn it, he didn't tell me about it. So I'm going to find out for myself. And I joke about it. We had our own version of don't ask, don't tell in our household. We didn't ask about Korea and Vietnam, and Dad didn't tell. And that's the way it was. But as I got to learn a little bit more, and I got to read some of these battlefield reports, my mother and I came across another document which sets us back, and I'll try to share it with you here. It's written in military speak. And you have to understand the context. I'm reading something to you that it's probably easier for me to read it now, but the first time that I saw it, it was hard for me to believe, and it'll make sense to you in a minute. It says, on the 28th of February 1967, during Operation Junction City, Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 18th Infantry was conducting an air mobile assault to assist Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 16th Infantry, who was in extremely heavy contact with a VC Battalion operating under the control of the 101st North Vietnamese Army Regiment near the village of Prek Kloc. Bravo 1st of the 16th was very much concerned with being overrun. During almost 3 hours of fighting, this rifle company had suffered 28 wounded and 25 killed. Essentially, a third of the company was out of action. The greatest concern, as I said, was they were in fear of being overrun. When Dad's company arrived, and their initial air mobile assault, meaning by helicopter, of a platoon plus, that was all they could fit into this small landing zone. They thought they were landing in a secure landing zone, and it turned hot. The soldiers from Bravo Company, including elements of what they called a command group, were pinned down by increasing enemy fire from a platoon minus the Viet Cong forces along a tree line. The mainstay of their resistance was a fortified machine gun bunker that was putting out very heavy automatic weapons fire. So everybody was basically pinned down. They couldn't move. They couldn't get around. Nobody else could get in. They were essentially stuck. And as it says, as the on-the-ground leader of Bravo Company's command group, First Sergeant Perry then stood erect. with complete disregard for his own safety, began single-handedly assaulting at some distance across enemy-dominated terrain the fortified machine gun bunker, firing his rifle into the bunker's firing aperture. Once he reached and scaled the bunker, First Sergeant Perry threw several hand grenades into the opening, reloaded his rifle, and then with his bare hands began ripping off the top of this fortified position. Dropping behind a bunker, he dispatched the remaining gun crew. His principal concern was protecting his men who were completely exposed in the open terrain. First Sergeant Perry's valorous action enabled Bravo Company to push the remaining elements off the LZ, allow the rest of the company to arrive. By selfless courage, heroic action, devotion to duty, at great personal risk, First Sergeant Perry upheld the highest traditions of the 1st Infantry Division in the United States Army. We had no idea. This is the guy who I remember growing up sitting at home having a rather incoherent conversation with our family cat. Saying, Simon, do you want to watch Magnum PI tonight or do you want to do something different? All right? This is a man I did not know because he didn't tell us. I try to give you some perspective about Dad. I joke, I tell people, I say when I was growing up, this was my customer service supervisor. He felt my pain. He also dealt in pain too. But he was 6'2", 210 pounds. He was an imposing figure. This picture here, again, was sent to us about a year ago. I'm told it was taken at a place called Firebase Mary Lou, located in Kon Tum Province in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. It was taken in his second tour in 1969. And he was a company first sergeant again. But what's interesting is that my mother and I, we saw Dad in uniform for years. We could tell you what all the decorations were. We had no idea what was behind that. And Dad was pretty humble and modest. He used to look at us and say, well, you get all this for being at the right place at the wrong time. It's an interesting way to describe 2 silver stars, 6 bronze stars, and 4 purple hearts. Bad timing. What was interesting is I also began to uncover references to a single officer that kept coming up in the dialogue. It was a general. And it's somebody that I remember Dad talking about, although it was a little bit passive, somewhat abstract, but I could tell that he liked this general very much. And when I got to meet some of these veterans, I asked him, I said, you know, who was General Hollingsworth? And the gentleman who wrote the letter that I shared with you paused and looked at me with extreme clarity and a considerable amount of reverence. He said, that was James Francis Hollingsworth. He was our assistant division commander. Oh, seemed to have lost it. I had a photograph in here, but he said basically, he's the man who decorated your father with his 2 silver stars. The photograph that I had of was General Hollingsworth. He passed away last year, but he was a remarkable guy because at age 26, he commanded an armor battalion under Patton in North Africa, 26 years old. And in Vietnam, he was always there on the ground with the soldiers. He was remarkable in the sense that they followed him because he'd been there. We've all heard the phrase, been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. Jim Hollingsworth was been there, done that. And so again, I began to understand who these people are that Dad kept referencing. I didn't listen all the time. It angers me. I didn't listen. He told me everything, and I didn't pay attention. So then I started to ask myself, well, who influenced Dad? Dad just didn't show up in Vietnam Day and said, hey, I think I'm going to do something heroic. Let's see what happens. Dad told me a long time ago, he said, there is no such thing as intentional valor. He said, intentional valor, most people end up in a body bag and kill everybody else around them. He said, I'm not here to get killed. I'm here to come home. And that was his perspective. So I said, well, where did this come from? So that was a picture I was going to show you now. My father's 16 years old in that picture. The Army believes he's 18. He enlisted in November 1948 with his cousin Leroy in the Oklahoma National Guard. Actually, when he enlisted, he was 14. But like I said, he was 6'1", 200 pounds, shaving twice a day. Of course he's 18. That's what they thought. But But a year and a half later, there he is in the central Korean mountains during the war. He's 17 in this picture. So I started to ask myself, well, where did he get this from? Where did he learn this? Who was he watching? Who were his leaders? And to put things in perspective, the unit that he served with, and if you can see it on his shoulder, there is a patch. It's a Thunderbird, and it's the insignia of the 45th Infantry Division from Oklahoma. And I began to uncover that the Oklahoma National Guard of the 45th served in World War II, a very distinguished history. Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, the Italian Mountain Campaign, southern France. It was this division that captured Nuremberg and liberated the surviving 32,000 captives at Dachau. These men had seen a lot. And after the war was over with, they went home, but when Korea started, they brought them all back or reconstituted most of the unit. And I think it's safe and fair to conclude that Dad was influenced by those men who just 5 years sooner had gone through a very horrific experience. That's who Dad was watching. It wasn't an accident when he ended up in Vietnam and did what he did in his second war. But I want to share another picture with you. Again, I saw this picture for years growing up. It was taken in Korea. These two men who have since passed, they were his foxhole buddies, if you will. That's actually a shelter, a fighting position. And when I pulled a picture out of the album, my intent was to scan it and then ship it to the Division Museum in Oklahoma City. And I turned it over, and this is what was written on back. It's an interesting way to describe a hole in the ground in a combat zone. But there were other educational experiences my father had. This picture was taken in Japan, and I ask you to point out the underage kid. Got a cigarette in his hand, got a well drink, and I keep looking at this picture, and all of these men have since passed, but I was actually able to meet a few of them. They all knew that he was underage. The guy on the far left was his cousin Leroy, who enlisted with. Hell, he knew Dad was 16. The company commander was Dad's high school teacher. Dad dropped out of high school to join the Army. So how did, what, Bill Perry's not here today? Where'd he go? Oh, he enlisted, okay. The guy next to him, Buddy Weens, Dad's other cousin, okay? So you got three criminals on the left who know who Dad is. But it's kind of interesting. I have no idea what he learned in that photograph, and that's part of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell program. I really don't want to know. But with this new context, I became to understand a little bit more about my father's passions, because there's a serious tone of all this. Because when my father came home from Vietnam, my father was in a leadership position, and I started to read papers that he wrote, white papers and positions that he had about the military. And I began to follow his thinking. And in the 1970s, he said, you know, this war is going to end. It's not that he wanted to go to war, but he says, unfortunately, we're in this war, but what can we learn from this so we don't have to do it again? He was thinking about what happens next. His concern was, and what I read in documents, he said after World War II in Korea, that all of our experience went home. And we lost all of that. And when I think about it, this isn't very different than what we do in a corporate setting or in a business setting. We call it succession planning. We call it lessons learned. That's what he was really trying to get at. And as I began to discover, Dad actually became a guy who started to shape the modern Army through education. He was a principal driver in something called the NCOES, the Non-Commissioned Officer Education System, basically educating younger soldiers for leadership positions for a peacetime army. That's what he was doing. But there were some other interesting examples that are unique to Dad. Dad took leadership very seriously, and this picture was taken in December of '76. He's re-enlisting for another 3 years. And it looks innocent enough, but the guy on the right, he's actually the youngest officer in Dad's battalion. Dad was now the sergeant major, and if those of you have served in the military, trust me, the sergeant major is about as close as you're going to come to God. And if you don't believe that, ask them. They will tell you and explain to you why they are God. Well, what he was doing there is he said, you're an officer, you have legal authority, you can provide me my re-enlistment oath, then you're going to memorize the damn thing, and you're going to recite it to me, and you're going to tell me exactly what it means, because if you're going to be my leader, then I want you to show me some respect. He wasn't being harsh, he was being fair. And he was trying to instill a sense of responsibility. And having a fun time jacking with the young guy. But he also led by example, because as you can see, this was taken in 1976, a very stylish haircut. Dad set the standard for hair. Nobody ever debated the point about what the haircut was going to be like. Again, there he is, OSHA compliant with the cigarette over the grill. Dad's motto for soldiers was, feed them, recognize them, and give them time off, and they will follow you through the gates of hell. Unfortunately, sometimes that was a little hazardous for your health because I have no idea what kind of flavoring he's adding to the chicken here, but this was Dad at his best. He actually loved to entertain. He wanted to be with the soldiers and their families. And this is where I think he was at his best. And what I took from that, and it was a line that Dad used a lot, but in fact I take it to heart as a leader today. It's my goal to develop a plan for all of the people who work for me. It's their individual plan. I'm responsible for their careers. A success plan, if you will. And we jointly create it, and we measure it, and it's the basis where I recognize their efforts. I'm not asking them to go to the gates of hell, but I ask them to do a lot of things. And so I think that's pretty applicable in what I do today, and hopefully I can build their individual talents and make them better performers and promote them and give them the opportunities and success. But as I'm speaking of soldiers, there's something that I share and I saw and I never understood back then, and it was the Christmas of '68. It was Christmas Eve. We were living in Germany. Dad was late coming home from work. He was in the barracks. And my German family was there, and we were waiting on Dad, and he was late. Mom was pretty hacked off. And then when he finally came home, Mom was furious. And this was after his first Vietnam tour, and he had actually 2 weeks before been told that he's going back for a second time. So when he got home, she got hacked at him, and for a guy who's pretty high-tempered, Dad was remarkably restrained. And he told my mother, as best I can remember it, he said, I understand, I just wanted to be there for him. Be there with these single soldiers who are living in the barracks. He said they're all alone, they're away from home, and in 6 months they're all going to that hell. They're all going to Vietnam. And this might be their last Christmas. That's a side many people never saw of my father. One of my favorite pictures, it's the only picture I have left of my father and I in uniform. I have hair. I need to reflect on that for a moment. But it was taken on the 1st of June, 1988. It was the day that I got promoted to captain, and Dad had long since been retired. But at least for me, he put on that uniform one more time. And that's how I'd like to remember him. So I think I've come full circle in understanding who my father was, unfortunately after he died, and how he impacted me for reasons I just didn't understand. But I also began to understand the things that I do, why I take stewardship and giving back so seriously. Passing on to the next generation, which you are. And that's what I think Dad was doing, pure and simple. He wasn't doing it for money. He wasn't doing it for glory. He wasn't doing it for awards. He had plenty of medals. That wasn't the point. But you have to understand, he was a kid that was born in dire circumstances in West Texas. The Army gave him an opportunity to succeed. It gave him a career. He was duty-bound to give back. And that's a little bit hard for a lot of people to understand, but that was his sense of obligation. So in hindsight, when people look at him and say, well, he led the life of a career soldier in retirement. He taught high school, junior ROTC in Joplin. He would go to Fort Leavenworth and Fort Leonard Wood to work with the retiree councils. And when his Agent Orange exposure from his first Vietnam tour brought on diabetes in 1973, for which he would suffer those effects for 36 years, it would damage his heart, his lungs, and take both of his legs. When he'd go to the Kansas City VA, he'd go as a patient, but he'd also go as a patient advocate. He was meeting soldiers coming home from Afghanistan and Iraq who had disabilities and had lost limbs. He never retired. He just contributed in another way. So I suppose in that regard, whether Dad wanted to or not, through his life experiences, through his initiatives, I think he's managed to outlive his life in a positive way. And again, maybe it's for the same reason, maybe it's faith, but 2 months before he died, I established a scholarship here in his name. And when I told him about it, Dad was a smart ass to the end. He looked at me and said, well, not bad for a guy who never went to college. Are you financing this or am I? That's exactly what he said to me. No, Dad, I'm paying for it. And that's how we left it. What I've really asked you to consider tonight is that you might not have to look very far beyond your own family and maybe within your own community to look for inspiration and instructive lessons on leadership. Let's keep in mind when we regale famous people like presidents, CEOs, and generals, or heroes of some measure, we speak about events that might be measured just in minutes, or hours, months, or if it's a president, 4 or 8 years. But what's that compared to a 70 or 80-year lifespan? Well, what were we doing all that other time when we didn't have them elevated on some pedestal? They were just doing their own thing, not in a spotlight. At that same time, while there are many more things that I've learned about my father's heroic actions, he wasn't alone in that regard. There are far more heroes and leaders amongst us than we imagine. And why is that? Because I think they possess a quality which is becoming pretty rare today: modesty and humility. Maybe in a single moment, short period of time, they acted not concerned about the consequences, fear of failure, pursuit of fame, recognition, or reward. They just acted. And if you try to approach them about it, they don't even want to be bothered by it. And it's unfortunate that it took my father's death for me to realize that. But it's also these same people who are amongst us today. They didn't have to serve. They didn't have to be soldiers, but we have a lot of leaders amongst us who inspire, who coach, who assist, who are active in their communities. They drive a voice of change. They give a hand. Some act of caring or volunteerism. And you might not think about it, but they operate businesses, teach school, they contribute to society, even if we don't agree with them. They're even active in politics, although when I wrote that, I kind of shuddered to think about politics here for a minute. It was 2 years ago, I took a flight to Paris one night from Dallas, and I was on board with a bunch of World War II veterans. I didn't know it at the time. We were in the gate area. But they were veterans from the 101st Airborne Division. It took me a while to figure out that they were actually going back to Normandy, and these are the people that we associate with that HBO miniseries called The Band of Brothers. But it was interesting to listen to these men talk. And I took away a couple simple concepts. The first was, we were just kids. And the second thing is that, yeah, we were Americans, we were representing our country, but in the end, we were just fighting for each other. And every day since that time has actually been a blessing. And when you look at it and ask what they've done since, they took that experience and they applied it to their life's work, and arguably they built a nation. As do so many others today who have served in one capacity or another. They bring diversity to our lives, and there are people around them and they marvel at how they make decisions. And one of them said, you know what, compared to jumping out of a plane and being shot at, everything else is relative. I suppose so. But it wasn't an accident. Those experiences actually never go away, but they do inform their judgment. And they do it without pomp and circumstance. Again, modesty and humility. So what does all this matter for our conference here? I suppose you wonder what that means. I'm going to get to this. The world that we live in today is very dynamic. It's moving at a pace that, for me, even though I'm in the business of technology, is breathtaking. You think back to the oil embargo of 1973, for those of us who are alive, it's nothing compared to today. Gas prices go up because of certain unrest in Libya. The House of Saud, will they survive? The Chinese and the Indians are growing economies. They're consuming natural resources like nobody's business. Poor agricultural practices on one continent drive up prices on another. A nuclear power plant has a meltdown after an earthquake and a tsunami. iPad parts can't be shipped from Japan. We're a lot more connected than you think, so I guess maybe ask you a question. Is the U.S. in far less control, or is the world really growing up around us? You decide, but the point is leadership takes many forms at a local level here. And we should all be mindful of the world that we live in. Many of us in America are isolated by world events. I get it. I understand. But 9/11 changed the way we look at things. But let's be honest, we live here in relative safety. We do. Good for us. But we just got to be cognizant about what happens around us. And if we're going to continue our prosperous ways, if you want to call it that, we've got to lead. We've got to expand our horizons. We've got to get out more, if you will. We've got to learn the world around us. And I'm not saying we become them, the others, but we need to understand other people, other cultures. Because if you don't, it's going to come at a price. And you might be surprised how much people outside of America know and understand about us. Several years ago, my wife and I were in Singapore. I was there on business. We're riding in a cab, and the driver turns around and he says, "Who do you think's going to win?" I'm like, "What the hell is this guy talking about?" And I said, "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" He said, "Obama or McCain." A cab driver in Singapore. I hate to admit it, I think he had better insights into our electoral process than some of our citizens. Growing up overseas, I came to understand the world from a different perspective. It shaped my thinking. I was raised in Germany during the Cold War, 60s and 70s. The Soviet was miles away, ready to attack. We lived under that constant threat. But when I was in junior high and high school, there was a German radical gang called the Baader-Meinhof gang that was targeting U.S. installations. And they blew up several buildings adjacent to our high school. Several soldiers were killed so long ago, but I don't even think about that. But that was my experience. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that we change our curriculums here in high schools and for you guys to go out there and say we need to learn world history at the expense of something else, but I think it's quite important that we come to understand our history as Americans first. I'm not being egotistical, but I think we need to understand in greater detail what is different and unique about America, because I think it'll help us do two things. One, appreciate what we have, and two, understand the relative differences when we engage others. I said earlier I wanted you to be responsible for yourself. Lead your own life. Know who you are. And when you engage others, you can be more mindful of the differences. I travel around the world an awful lot. I'm cognizant that I'm an American. And I do my best to reach out. I've been living in Brazil for 120 days. I tell people I've learned how to speak Portuguese. I think it's a butchered version of it, but it's my effort to try to get along with those people. To learn their language, learn their culture, read and write. Maybe it's a small sign of leadership from my perspective. But I think I want you to look around at the opportunity that it creates for yourself if you know who you are and where you go and how you can make a difference. I'm a senior executive in a large publicly traded company. We've got 200 and some thousand employees. But when we put together our business plans, we put them together based by markets, service lines, geographies, countries. We're constantly evolving, lessons learned. Our whole goal is to speed up the cycle of learning. And we can't do that if we think just like Americans. We today serve our clients in 130 countries. It's an amazing opportunity that we have. And if I think about you guys here, what about the experience and the partnership that you have with Dalian? Maybe some of you have mixed opinions about that, but imagine this campus without that relationship. Take advantage of the opportunity that's been given to you. It's a global marketplace. Everybody's competing. And you have that opportunity that's presented to you here. And I think the Chinese experience is something that other universities would probably die for, poor choice of words, but we'd be very envious of. So don't always take things for granted. A lesson for you COBA students, and I guess by show of hand, how many of you are COBA students? Oh yeah, you guys are the ones who threaten if you don't show up, you're not going to get the, yeah, I got that, all right. Come on, guys. I was in front of a marketing class a couple months ago. It was a 300 level class, I think, and I said, listen, by show of hands, how many of you guys are business students? And everybody kind of looked around and go like, what are you asking, moron? We're in a 300 level class, we must be business students. I was just checking. And I said, listen, let me ask you something. When you guys graduate here, how many of you guys are going to represent that you have a degree in business? And everybody shot their hands up. I said, good, good. So let's fast forward for a minute. I just got your CV. Who can tell me here which country in Europe just had its debt downgraded? Nobody raised their hands. So I said, okay, I'm going to help you out here. Can somebody tell me what the acronym PIIGS stands for? Pigs. One woman raised her hand. She said, G stands for Greece. There were 100 students in that class. My point here, as it was back then, this is a big world out there. And it's far more connected than you can ever imagine. If you don't believe that a nation defaulting on their sovereign debt has an impact and a ripple effect in this country, you need to get engaged. If you don't believe that the Chinese government has in effect financed our housing here, unfortunately to their dismay now, for many, many years, we are a connected world. There is more going on outside of this, and if you don't engage, you will fall behind those people who do. It is a competitive world out there. You don't have to be conversant about everything, but you've got to be aware, and you got to broaden your horizons a little bit. I don't want to embarrass anybody here, but if I turn around and said, hey, how many people are following Charlie Sheen on Twitter, somebody's going to raise their hand. Fair enough, I get it. It's a form of entertainment. Let me give you a piece of advice. When you show up on somebody's doorstep looking for a job, you know, that inconvenient thing that's going to occupy most of your adult life, that's going to finance the opportunities you're going to have, family, make a living, please don't start off by saying, I actively tweet. It's a career-limiting move. All right? Let me give you a suggestion. Impress us with your insight, with your passion. I really enjoyed being on a panel this week. Dave Lennox, I don't know if he's here in the audience or not, but somebody had asked earlier about, you know, what advice would he give students, and he said, have a passion, be an activist. He said, find something that pisses you off, an interesting approach, but he said, find something that really gets you fired up and then go after it and pursue it. I thought, what great advice. And that's what I'm trying to tell us. When you sit down in front of us and you want us to hire you, show us something. Show us some passion. Tell us what motivates you. Show us you care. Do you volunteer? What do you do to innovate? What do you do to give back? An internship? Something like that. That's what we want to remember from you. A little bit of a work ethic. Show us some passion. You always got time to tweet later, okay? And for those of you on Facebook, let me give you a piece of advice. First thing we do is when we see a CV, we try to find out if you have a Facebook account. And then we kind of take a look and go, you know that dog that hears that whistle from hell that nobody else hears? I'm like, I didn't know you could do that. That's interesting. We're not hiring him, but that's an interesting picture. All right, so be a little bit more careful about what you take pictures of, okay? I was thinking back when I was in high school, I had a conversation with my father one time. Actually, it wasn't a conversation. He talked and I listened, but he said something to me. He said, son, damn it, you don't pay attention to detail. Detail is what matters in life. Well, here I am 30 years later, detail is all I see. But what Dad was trying to point out was he was trying to give me some advice. Pay attention to the little things in life, and they'll serve you well. So let me close with a couple of basics here that hopefully you can take away. This slide intentionally left blank. Just want you guys to know that. And I'm going to demonstrate some of my other PowerPoint skills. It's okay, I'll share later how that works. Have a plan, okay? 4-letter word, plan. Even if it's a bad one, just have one. You don't like where you're going in life? Well, write out a plan and change where you're going. I know it's easier said than done, but at least follow some sort of a plan. And have a succession plan. And I know that's maybe focused on an older audience. But you know, Dad was anal to a fault. When he passed, my mother and I settled his affairs in less than 2 weeks. That was Dad's plan. He said, I'm dead, throw the dirt on top of the box, put me in the ground, a little bit of bravado, but basically said when it's said and done with, move on. And I know that sounds harsh, but have a succession plan. I go to Rio, back to Brazil next week, and heaven forbid something were to happen to me. But whatever happens, I know that my family is going to be taken care of because I have a plan. I plan on coming back. But in case I don't wake up tomorrow, or in case I don't make it back from that trip, I have an obligation at a minimum as a husband and as a father, and I think as a man, to make sure that my family is taken care of. So I want you to think about that. And maybe go home and talk with your family or your parents. What's your plan, guys? Ask them. Because if they're not here someday, you might not know what to do. I also say it's about the kids, and I'm not a very good role model right now because my 10-year-old daughter's at home and I'm standing here. But it's the greatest pleasure in the world to listen to my daughter tell me about school, what she's learned. It's fascinating. It's scary, but it's fascinating. She's doing fractions right now, which is just completely intimidating to me, so I'm getting a refresher in math right now from my daughter. She also corrects my speech, too. But she's teaching me basic geology, and I probably shouldn't say this, but she's a big fan of crime shows. She watches all of the CSIs, and during a commercial break, she tells us, this is what's going to happen, this is who did it. She's completely wrong, by the way, but at least it's fun to watch her mind work. I don't understand why he killed her. It didn't make any sense. Okay, let's move on to the next show. When are we watching Miami, Dad? But it's great to see her. But the problem is that I'm not home enough. So let's remember it's about the kids. Try to be there for them as much as you can. Because she's going to grow up and she's going to leave home, and I'm going to have missed that opportunity. I'm going to be paying for everything. I understand that, but at least I want to be able to see her. The other thing is lead with a positive example, and I think this is an impact here from this conference. Listen, it takes nothing to be negative. It takes absolutely no creativity to be negative. It takes a lot of insight to be positive. When I believe that there are two people in the world, sorry, being general here, I think there are those people who create energy and those people who take it away. Now, taking away energy doesn't mean coming up with thoughtful dialogue and provoking insight. That's okay. But people who are just negative on things, the glass is half empty, don't have a lot of time for that. So I'd ask you to think about leading with a positive example. Take care of yourself. That's a health comment. Tonight at dinner, somebody was asking me, and they said, well, how do you do it with all of the travel? And I said, well, look, I mean, you've got to make certain decisions. Believe me, I like to eat food like everybody else does, but I'm trying to save myself for the moment that I can retire so I can eat, Tex-Mex all day and get liquored up around the clock. I'll get an earring, grow a ponytail, who knows, But the idea behind it is that I know that if I don't take care of myself, that day's never going to come. And that's my obligation to my family. So again, I'm asking you to lead your own life here for a minute. But if we step it up a little bit, and this is the personal side of things, I want you to become civically active. And what does that mean? Well, get engaged in your community. Pay attention to what's around you. And vote. Vote. Voting is the single greatest mechanism for leadership accountability we have in this country, if you think about it. And we have 65% voter turnout. I mean, think about that. 65% of those who are eligible in this country vote. It's incredible. I always get a kick out of people who complain after the election. I said, you vote? And they said, no. And I'm going like, you don't have a leg to stand on. And if you don't like the outcome, good, vote again. Second Tuesday in November. Happens every 2 years like clockwork. Or first Tuesday in November, I'm sorry. But vote. Get involved on a local level. Be involved in your community. Contribute. If Brent Dunn were here, I'm sure he'd like that. He's responsible for the foundation here at the university. But when I say contribute, and if you're going to give money, and I think somebody brought this up today, if you're going to contribute money, and I do contribute money to the university, but I direct where it's going. I want to know where it's going. So if I'm awarding a scholarship, I want to meet that person. I want to get to know who they are. Share something maybe about my father, the one who arguably financed the scholarship. But the idea behind it is be active. Don't just write a check. Write a check with a meaning and a purpose. And the other way you can contribute is through time and experience. It's the hardest thing to measure, but it's the most rewarding. If I give you a couple of thoughts here real quick also on the job front, and again, I'm thinking back to some of the comments that have been made today, and I'm thinking back to Dave Lennox. He was talking about getting involved. Solve relevant problems. The easiest way to get promoted in life, solve relevant problems. And when you do that, you'll be amazed what you can get done if you don't actually care who gets the credit. That's the most important thing. I've done better when I've actually pulled something off as opposed to saying, do I have a good photo op here? Is the boss going to see me? I don't have time for that. And if it works out, then they'll recognize me for it. Mentoring. God. Take time to mentor somebody. For those of you who are in your late teens or early 20s, mentor a family member, a brother or a sister, cousin, distant relative, the neighbor's kid, and then get a mentor for yourself. Something I always tell people when we're talking about energy and vitality, don't take it away, but ask for help. Most people think that asking for help is a sign of weakness. I think it's a sign of strength. I will tell you what's a sign of weakness. The day that you wake up and decide that you're the smartest person in the room is the day that you're hosed. Because that's the day that you stop listening. And if I say something about this conference has been extremely enlightening for me because I got to hear different perspectives. It's not that I don't travel in a particular circle, but I travel in a business circle and I hear certain things and I hear business problems from clients and all the rest of that. That's what I do. But here to hear people from different passions, art, science, volunteerism. I mean, it was an amazing experience for me. So I hope that you guys engage, because the thought that I want to leave you with is that somebody is always watching you. And as I close here for a minute, like I said earlier, today's the 14th of April. And this is the last picture that I have of my father that I took when he was alive. He had his doubts about me, but I do have a plan, Dad. And I did pay attention, and I listened, and we love you, and I miss you. Thank you.